You're watching The Word on Cars. My name's Nish, and this here is a Hyundai Palisade. It's a budget-friendly luxury SUV for the whole family that's about to surprise you. So, let's talk about the Hyundai Palisade. The Palisade was released in 2020 with two levels of trim, the Palisade and Palisade Highlander, which this car here is. The Highlander being the top spec trim level, and in 2021 Hyundai introduced the Elite, which became the mid-spec trim level. The Palisade is definitely a very attractive car. It certainly stands out on the road thanks to its elegant styling and is jam-packed with features and technology for the whole family. Now, Hyundai did refresh the Palisade in 2023 with changes to front and rear end styling, minor changes to the interior and technology. There were also changes to the model lineup. The Elite became the base model and the calligraphy was introduced to replace the Highlander for the 2024 model year. Hyundai also introduced the Calligraphy Black Ink Edition, which is a blacked out version of the calligraphy. Since its release in 2020, the Palisade has been selling like hotcakes, and there's a really good reason for that. In 2022, this particular Palisade cost 78,000 Australian dollars on road, regardless of whether you chose the 7 or 8 seat configuration, which is a no-cost option. If you compare that to the rest of the market, the likes of the Mercedes-Benz GLE, BMW X5 or Audi Q7, which are premium brands mind you, the Palisade undercuts these premium competitors by $40,000 to $50,000 with similar features and technology. Prices have moved since 2020, with the calligraphy costing around 89,000 Australian dollars on road these days for the 2024 model year. But even then, the Palisade is still a bargain. Now I know people will say, hang on Nish, it's a Hyundai, surely the quality doesn't compare. But that's not the case. Hyundai's come a long way since the introduction of the XL all those years ago. So I'm going to take you through the Palisade, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Palisade is a popular choice for families. So let's talk about the exterior styling of the Palisade, starting with the front end. The Palisade gets a very elegant mug, which gives this thing real road presence. You won't miss a Palisade coming at you, especially with this massive brushed aluminium grille, which sparkles under the sun and has forward-facing camera integrated into it. The front end also gets a sense of driver assistance systems, which blends in nicely, and parking sensors. Lighting-wise, the Palisade gets full LED lamps up front. The top bezels contain the turn signals, while the lower bezels contain the headlamps. The daytime running lights run up from the headlamp bezel through a cutout in the bumper, into the turn signal bezel, and into the side of the car, and integrate beautifully. They certainly help the Palisade stand out. In terms of colors, this particular Palisade is finished in steel graphite. In today's model lineup, though, creamy white is the only no-cost option, while all other colours attract a cost of 695 Australian dollars. Moving on to the side of the Palisade, it's very much an SUV over here as you would expect, although you still get a sense of elegance thanks to this high belt line that runs from the front headlamp bezels and into the rear tail lamp bezels, pronounced crease lines down the bottom, brushed aluminium trim that runs around the windows and the full length of the doors, and these unique 20-inch wheels on all four corners. There's also large mirrors with integrated LED turn signals and privacy glass for both second and third rows. The Palisade's also quite tall with good ground clearance for going off-road. Remember though that this has all-wheel drive, so it's not going to be as capable as an SUV with four-wheel drive. Given it's so tall, these optional running boards are a good investment, especially if you have young kids. So, moving on to the back end of the Palisade, we have the same level of elegance and simplicity as the rest of the car. It's not over the top, it's just enough in my opinion. Now, starting at the top, we have this rear end overhang which mimics a spoiler, which adds to the side profile of the Palisade. We also have the Palisade script that runs a full length of the car, which looks good on the back end here. Lighting wise, the Palisade gets full LEDs back here, including tail lamps that have integrated daytime running lights, which go up and across the belt line of the car, just like the front DRLs, and adds to the elegance of the Palisade. There's also reverse sensors back here with audible and visual warnings through the infotainment screen, and a rear-facing camera with multiple views, including a bird's eye view and grid line to show you where you're heading. Now, one thing I don't like back here, you have these plastic trimmings that run the full length of the tail lamp bezels and wrap around the reverse lamps, which I reckon are meant to look like brushed aluminium. If you squint from afar, they definitely do look like aluminium, but close up, they just look like painted plastic, to be honest with you. Speaking of plastic, there's also a trim piece down the bottom here which wraps nicely around the exhaust tips, which, by the way, are functional. Thank you, Hyundai, for not giving us fake exhaust tips. Now, getting into the cargo area of the Palisade is easy. You can press the popper on the tailgate itself, like so, use the button on the key fob, or you can stand behind the tailgate for a few seconds and the tailgate, which Hyundai calls the smart tailgate, will automatically open. Handy if your hands aren't free, and definitely works better than the systems offered by some German competitors out there that make you kick your foot under the car. I can't tell you how many times I've watched people do this in parking lots and fail. It's hilarious to watch. Anyway, back here you get 311 litres of space with the second and third rows up. You can drop the third row down from the cargo area, which increases space back here to over 704 litres. And if that's not enough, you get buttons back here to drop the second row for a massive 2,447 litres of cargo space. Note that the buttons won't bring the second row back up again, you'll have to do that manually. Capacity aside, Hyundai's thought about the little details in this car. You get anchor points for your seat belts when the second and third rows aren't in use. You also get storage under the floor that doubles up as storage for the cargo blind when it's not being used. The blind itself extends from the second row all the way to the end to hide any valuable items back here, although with the third row up, there's nowhere to mount the cargo blind, so you can peek into the cargo area through the back window. Last few things to mention back here, you get a few anchor points to tie cargo down or install a cargo net, bag holders, a 12-volt power outlet, and a dome light to see in the dark. Getting into the Palisade is just as easy. Simply walk up to the car with the key fob in your pocket, push a button on the door handle, which unlocks the doors, and away you go. Now, sadly, Hyundai skimped out on the back doors when it comes to this functionality, so to get back there, you'll need to either unlock the front doors or use the buttons on the key fob to unlock the back doors. On the key fobs themselves, you get two of those with buttons to lock and unlock the car, as well as a button to open the electric tailgate, as I mentioned earlier. You can also roll up or down the windows with the key fob, and the key fob itself does include a physical key as is standard these days. Open the door to the Palisade, you're greeted with brushed aluminium scuff guards on all four corners that say Palisade. The doors themselves open fairly wide, so getting in and out isn't difficult at all. The driver's seat and steering wheel do move out of the way to give the driver more room to get in and out. No grab handles though up front for driver or passenger. I'm 5'9" though, and I find stepping in without stepping on the side steps to be fairly easy. As I mentioned earlier, if you have young kids, get the side steps. So that brings us to the interior of the Palisade, and boy oh boy, it's a gorgeous place to be, which might surprise some of you given this is a Hyundai. I'm blown away by the design, interior quality and materials in here. Design and materials wise, the interior looks beautiful in Napa leather with quilting on the seats and brushed aluminium trimming throughout. Buttons and dials that are also finished in brushed aluminium with carvings all around that look and feel expensive, and soft surfaces throughout that feel nice to the touch, and everything is where you would expect it to be. You do get this faux wood trim that runs across the dashboard and into the doors, but I like the look. Definitely looks premium and again feels like wood grain to the touch. Interior colors, Palisade was offered in this color combination of cream and navy, which looks fantastic, or in black on black or burgundy on black. Interior color was dependent though on the exterior color you chose. Seats wise up front, we get electrically adjustable memory seats that show up on the infotainment screen as you adjust them. The seats are very comfortable, and in terms of space, there's plenty of headroom up front for tall passengers. I'm 5'9", and I still have plenty of space here. Now, technology wise in here, we get a 10.25 inch touchscreen, which was upgraded to a 12.3 inch screen in facelifted models, but it's plenty of real estate. There's also a row of quick access buttons for the infotainment system under the screen, which includes rotary dials for volume and media, as well as a favorite button which can be programmed and a button to quickly access settings. On the dials, you can swap the functionality of these over if you prefer to have the volume closer to you, which is a handy little feature to have. Now, the home screen isn't all that great. It shows basic information, but should have been more like Ford's Sync 3 system that gives you various sources of information like your phone, music, and navigation at the same time. That aside, though, you get standard features like Bluetooth connectivity, navigation, digital radio, USB audio, and once you're out of the home screen, you can have two sources of information side by side, so the screen is somewhat configurable from that perspective. There's also a 12-speaker infinity speaker system that absolutely pumps and sounds pretty good, with a center speaker up front and a subwoofer in the back, and digital audio processing. Palisade also has wide Apple CarPlay and Android Auto that work brilliantly. You also get a voice memo function for reminders, a built-in manual, and a couple of kid-friendly features for the parents. First being quiet mode. Now, if you have a kid sleeping in the back and you don't want to disturb them but still want to listen to music or have navigation turned on, quiet mode will move the sound to the front speakers at a reduced level of volume, which is a great feature for parents. Then there's passenger talk, which picks up your voice through a mic in the front and pipes it into the back of the car through the speakers. Now, this might sound gimmicky, but the Palisade is a pretty long car, so if you have passengers in the third row, you won't have to turn around to project your voice or shout to have a convo. Last thing to mention infotainment wise is that you get a blue light filter to take the strain off your eyes. Very thoughtful of you, Hyundai. Now, moving down the center console, there's a dedicated cluster for the tri-zone climate control in the Palisade. Again, two rotary dials to adjust temperature, a screen with all the information you need, and a button to access rear climate controls, which bring up the rear settings on the infotainment screen and can be locked to keep little hands away from the buttons in the second row. More on that one later. We also get heated and ventilated seats in the first and second row of this car, as well as a heated steering wheel. You can stick everything into auto and the Palisade will warm or cool your bottom and your hands based on the set temperature of the climate control. Absolutely love it. Now, there's a couple of other items that live on the center console. We have the gear selector, which Hyundai has kept nice and simple with just 4 buttons that look and feel premium and works perfectly. There's also a rotary dial to select drive modes. What I like about this is that the normal and terrain modes have been split between the 2 sides of the dial. Pressing the button in the middle flips between the 2 sides, so you won't accidentally put this thing into a terrain mode. Everyday modes are Comfort, Eco, Sport and Smart, while terrain modes are Snow, Mud and Sand, although I really can't see too many people taking this thing off-road. I guess it's nice to know that you can though. A couple of other buttons. There's auto hold, so you can take your foot off the brake and relax at a traffic light and let the Palisade hold itself in place. There's hill descent control, which will control the braking and slow the Palisade down if you're taking it down a steep hill. A button to turn parking sensors on or off, and a button to access the surround view camera system, which I mentioned earlier. Then there's the instrument cluster. No digital display here, instead there are dials for speed and tack and a helper screen in the middle, although Hyundai did upgrade this to a 12.3-inch digital display for the refreshed Palisade. Helper screen in the Palisade works fine though, plenty of information like trip information, driver assistance information, and access to settings for the heads-up display, driver assistance, doors, lights, sounds, and a bunch more, which is controlled through buttons on the steering wheel. Now, driver assistance wise, the Palisade has everything you need, from adaptive cruise control, which gives you full stop and go functionality, active lane keeping, active blind spot monitoring, which will pull you back into your lane if there's a car in the next lane, safe exit assist, which will warn you of any oncoming cars when you open the door to step out onto the road, with audible and visual warnings, forward and rear emergency braking, and cross traffic alert. On the blind spot monitoring, when you indicate, you get a feed of your blind spot on the helper screen through cameras mounted in the mirrors. It's a brilliant idea and I'm not sure why others haven't followed suit yet. Once you get used to this, it's hard to go back. Now, heads-up display in this car works really well, very configurable and shows you a lot of information, speed, turn-by-turn navigation, driver assistance and what they're doing, including blind spot monitoring, media sources and traffic sign recognition. Steering wheel wise, it looks good and feels premium in this navy leather with brushed aluminium trim. There's also buttons on the left hand side to control your audio and phone, while you've got buttons on the right to control the helper screen, adaptive cruise control and active lane keeping. We get paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel to control the 8-speed gearbox in this car, as well as automatic headlights with automatic high beam and rain sensing wipers, which show up on the screen when you adjust them. Again, this should be standard on all cars, so you don't have to fiddle around with the stalks to work out what your headlights and wipers are doing. The parking brake and electric tailgate buttons are over on the right hand side of the steering wheel, along with a bunch of other buttons for traction control, blind spot monitoring and the like. I must admit, I'm not a fan of manufacturers that stick the parking brake over here. I get why they do it though. It's so you can put the car into gear with your left hand and release the parking brake with your right hand at the same time, but the parking brake belongs on the center console. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, there's also a console on the ceiling in the Palisade to operate lighting and the sunroof up front and moonroof in the back, which is absolutely massive. The front gets a manual sunshade while the back gets an electric sunshade. What's most impressive up here is this drop-down convex mirror, which you can push to open and gives you a really good view of the second and third rows of the Palisade. So if you have kids back there, this thing is great to keep an eye on them. Storage-wise, there's a lot of it up here. We get a decent-sized glove box, which is fairly wide and deep. Lidded storage in the center console. It slides out of the way at the press of a button. In here we get 2 trick cup holders that fold away when not in use, but spin up when you need them at the touch of a button. A wireless charger and USB-A port. There's also storage under the armrest, which includes a removable tray and a deep bin with another USB-A port and 12-volt power outlet. There's also a fairly large storage area under the center console, perfect for a handbag so it's out of the way. You do get a USB-A port and 12-volt power outlet down here as well. In terms of the doors, you get fairly deep door bins with bottle holders and these tiny storage spaces where you grab the door handle, which I found is perfect for a phone. Now that we've covered the front, let's jump in the back and see what's going on back there. First thing you notice when you jump into the second row of the Palisade is that there's a lot of space back here. I have plenty of headroom, knee room, and really plenty of space to stretch myself out back here, even though the driver's seat is set to my driving position. Given this Palisade is the 7-seat version, we have captain seats in the back with armrests that can be moved out of the way. The seats themselves are really comfortable and covered in the same Napa leather with quilting as the front. The seats slide back and forth and can be reclined, so it's easy to get really comfortable back here. Now, both second row seats have ISOFIX points and top tether mounts for baby seats. On the topic of babies, we have sunshades in both rear doors as well. The second row passengers get their own climate controls back here, including heated and ventilated seats with 3 levels of heating and cooling with a dedicated screen. The controls can be locked from the infotainment screen, as I mentioned earlier, to keep those little fingers from playing with the controls. In terms of other convenience features, the second row gets 2 cup holders in the doors in 2 different sizes that kids can get to easily, and bottle holders at the bottom of the doors. We also get the same storage in the door handles back here as the front doors. The front seats have map pockets on the back sides and USB-A ports on the sides of the front seats, well placed if you want to mount a tablet on the backs of the seats for kids. There's also a 12-volt power outlet in the center console and grab handles for both rear doors. Vents for heating and cooling are located on the ceiling, which I think is the perfect place for these to be effective, along with map lights and the moonroof. Time to jump into the third row and see what we have there. Let's start with getting into the third row, which Hyundai has made really easy. There's a button on the side of the seat, pushing this folds the seat forward and slides the seat out of the way so you can step into the third row. There are also grab handles on the inside to help with getting in. Given this is the 7-seater, you can also walk into the third row through the space between the captain's seats. Great for kids, not so great if you're a fully grown adult. Now, once you're in, getting out is just as simple. You have the same button on the tops of the captain's seat, so simply press the button, the seats fold, slide forward, and out you go. Space-wise back here, it's surprisingly roomy even for an adult. There's plenty of headroom, decent knee room, and even though the seat in front of me is pushed as far back as it can go. Now again, the seats are quilted in Nappa leather and really comfortable. You also get an ISOFIX point on the left seat and top tether mounts for the left and middle seats in the third row. You also get the same convenience features back here on both sides, 2 cup holders within easy reach, USB-A charging ports, speakers, and the same vents in the ceiling for the third row passengers. So, we've covered the exterior and the interior of the Palisade, but how does it drive? Let's find out, shall we? So, driving the Hyundai Palisade. Now, let's start by talking about engines. This car has a 2.2-litre turbo diesel under the hood that's good enough for 147 kilowatts of power and 440 newton meters of torque. Hyundai does offer the Palisade with a V6 as well. That cranks out 217 kilowatts of power and a little less torque. Now, the drawback with the V6 though is the fact that you can't actually get that in all-wheel drive. It's front-wheel drive only, whereas the 2.2-litre turbo diesel comes standard with all-wheel drive. The other thing to consider is fuel consumption. The turbo diesel does 7.3 litres per 100 kilometres, whereas the V6 does 10.7 litres per 100 kilometres. Those are claimed numbers from Hyundai. The turbo diesel is perfectly fine for this car, even though this thing is pushing close to 2 tons of weight around. You certainly don't feel like you're missing out on power in this car, especially given it has 440 newton meters of torque. It is very, very responsive. Stick this into sport and it does become a little bit more responsive. It does hold gears for longer. Now, gearbox wise in this car, you get an 8-speed automatic. You have flappy paddles on the steering wheel to change gears manually, but in auto, it performs perfectly fine. Gear changes are nice and subtle. You can't really feel them, so it performs really, really well. In terms of steering in this car, again, it works fine. It is a little vague. You can't always tell what the front wheels are doing, but in a car that's this large, and given the segment that they're catering for with this car, that is, you know, family-friendly SUV, it's really not much of an issue. Suspension in this car really surprises me. It's been set up really, really well for all road conditions. I mean, it handles undulations, bumps, and potholes really, really well, as if they weren't even there. It is a really comfortable place to be when you're driving this down the road. When you do push this thing around corners, it does lean a little bit, which you expect, given this is a fairly tall car and quite a heavy one at that as well. But again, really no issues from that perspective. Now, driver assistance in this car is fantastic. Everything works as you would expect it to. The lane keeping will keep you smack bang in the middle of the lane. It'll follow roads really, really well. The adaptive cruise control, stop and go, again, works really well as well. It'll bring you to a full stop and start moving again when the traffic in front of you starts moving forwards. It can be a little aggressive sometimes on takeoff, but you can adjust the level of responsiveness through the helper screen here in the middle, and the blind spot monitoring in the system in this car is phenomenal. I mean, the fact that you can see what's in your blind spot without doing a head check in your helper screen here is fantastic. Like I said, other manufacturers need to get on board with that. Then we have comfort, which is really the most important thing about the Palisade. And I think Hyundai's nailed it. They haven't just focused on driver comfort in this car. They're focused on comfort all around across all three rows. And it's a family car at the end of the day, and they've really paid attention to that market to understand their needs. If you've got kids, the Palisade is fantastic. You can keep an eye on them with this convex mirror up top. You've got passenger talk to have a conversation with them. You've got quiet mode when you're coming home at night to not disturb the kids while they're sleeping. I mean, they're the little things that Hyundai's thought about that you don't necessarily find with other manufacturers. Overall, I genuinely think that the Palisade is a pretty good proposition, considering you can pick up one of these things on the second-hand market for a touch over 55,000 Australian dollars, or buy it brand new for around 89,000 Australian dollars. Either way, you're still undercutting their premium competitors out there by $40,000 to $50,000, as I mentioned earlier. I think the only drawback with the Hyundai is the fact that it's a Hyundai. So my advice to anyone out there looking for a large SUV to take the family around in comfort is to not be a brand snob. Check out the Palisade.